Class, good morning and welcome to April. April's a fabulous thing because it means we're so close to being done. I don't know if you feel the energy. I do. I'm not feeling it from y'all. I was like, oh my God, it's class. But I'm here to tell you, we did the turtle thing last week, right? We're going to make it. We're going to make it across the beach. You got one more week of that research paper, then we can put that thing away. So I'm here to encourage you, I hope, toward the final steps. And one of the things I'm going to say today, and it's kind of ironic since there's a big basketball game tonight here, not here, but Baylor fans know that there's a big basketball game tonight. I'm going to talk about the Final Four today, not the Final Four basketball Final Four, but the Final Four paragraphs of the research paper today. It just coincides quite nicely in terms of this lecture. There's a couple things I need to do here today, I think, to prepare you for a complete and final successful research paper experience. One is to do what I started last week, I think, is just to encourage you, keep working. There's an element of stamina involved in this course. And the fact that you're still here, you're still coming, you're still turning things in is absolutely to your credit. I think that's half of what life is. I mean, I'm not the first one to say half of life is just showing up, but often it is those who are most determined and most stubborn who succeed because you keep showing up. So you keep showing up, you keep doing the work, you're here. So let's finish strong. If you can, rally your energy, clear the decks, whatever cliche you want to use, we're going to get there. I want to show you a couple things here that will finish the process research paper wise. But before I do, I need to talk to you. I want to talk to you about construction. I want to talk to you about building. You see on the screen a variation, this kind of a famous historic picture of the stages of the Eiffel Tower as it was being constructed. In the upper left-hand corner is something that is unrecognizable as the as the Eiffel Tower in Paris, France. What is in the bottom right-hand corner is the finished, completed, iconic Eiffel Tower. But you can't just build the Eiffel Tower, not as is in a final shot. It takes steps and it takes sequences of steps. You have to, in the upper left-hand corner, build those legs. And the legs have a certain architectural requirement to them. They have placements that they have to be in relationship to the other legs. So it all fits when you get to the second part and you join the towers, you join the legs onto the platform. And then you have to build the next tier, the third one over, to get up to that second balcony. There's a sequence that's involved, and there's a certain physics that has to be accomplished so that it doesn't tip over, or so that it bears the weight of that thing that's going to be added to it. I bring all this into today. Today's my architecture metaphor to suggest that what we're doing in this class is building. We are building essays. They have a certain structure that is required, but I want you to know that I'm very interested not in you just writing the robot essay that I say you have to write. I don't want you just to write my essay. Look, there's this cool thing. It's been going on for a couple of years now, but there are software programs out there. There are algorithms that write newspaper articles. For example, there was a Final Four game last night. The women's basketball champion was determined, and there are stories that have already been written about it by computers. So rather than an actual human being writing about the events, a computer told the story, pulled interviews from the people, and crafted a piece of writing following machine rules for what it sounds like to write an effective sports story. All right, this has been going on for a number of years. So machines can do the work for us. I'm not asking you to write like a machine, but I am suggesting that in the scope of all forms of architecture, there's lots of towers you can build. I love that. There's lots of style that you can personally bring into your writing. I think you should aspire to that. I want your voice. I want your style. But there are also certain requirements. So in the midst of all of your style and all of your artistry and all of your energy, and a lot of you write some really interesting research papers because you chose things that matter to you. You're going to bring that energy in. But I'm going to ask you to do certain things structurally with your research paper. You know this. One of the ways I can help you with the structure is to kind of explain to you the rules of architecture. Not the rules of actual physical architecture, but in this class, the rules of architecture for building paragraphs. We may have seen this before. You may have seen this document before. If you've studied with me in 1301, you likely saw this before. I'll suggest that if you're going to build anything effectively, like a paragraph, let's talk about that because that's really what this is for. A paragraph follows certain rules, structure rules. It's like a building. And I've used this analogy likely before. Certain walls have to exist where they are because they are load bearing. Without that load bearing wall there, the ceiling collapses. That wall, maybe they can move that wall around. That's a stylistic wall. That's a required wall. Some of these are definitely requirements for strong academic writing. For example, number 2, a topic sentence. You know, and I'll do it again today with some of the work I'm about to present. I'm always interested in how clear is the topic sentence that begins each paragraph. Does it signal what that paragraph is going to be about specifically? Code number 2. Code number 3, 4, 5 is a sequence. 3, 4, 5 is what happens inside your paragraph. You introduce a source, and then you bring in a quote and add a citation. So credential it, cite it, and then interpret it. Credential, citation, interpretation. 3, 4, 5, and then 6. Transition. Transition into the next quote, or transition out of the paragraph, whichever it may be, but it's a sequence of how do you build 3, 4, 5, maybe 6, 3, 4, 5, maybe 6, 3, 4, 5. It's like dance. Dance step 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. In this case, 3, 4, 5, 3, 4, 5. And then at some point you'll end your paragraph. Those are some other codes, which we'll talk about in just a minute. All right, so this is the structure. This is what I'm asking you to do to build a paragraph. And it's been fairly consistent throughout the semester. Been fairly consistent in the models I show you. And in the feedback I sent you on Saturday, it was also consistent, or at least I hoped it was consistent. And if it was inconsistent, I gave you some notes on that. This is my transition into, we're going to take a step back and talk about problem solution paper right now. Problem solution paper is a tool that allows you to be more successful with your research paper. It is a device that helps you master certain skills to help you then deliver more effectively on those skills in the research paper. But I don't want to diminish the fact that your problem solution paper was an accomplishment. A number of you did really amazing things with it. You did really strong work. I would need you to know that. I want you to see that. And I tried to send that to you on Saturday as a PDF with my comments on it. If you did not receive an email from me on Saturday, please speak to me because I might have missed you. I don't think I did. If you just haven't checked your email, that's a different question. But I want you to know you got feedback on your problem solution paper. The problem with the feedback on the problem solution paper is I went old school. All we've ever done all of this semester, and those who studied with me in the fall, all we did in the fall was do digital feedback. Like in Brightspace, I would put writing on your papers and you would read it there. But I went old school, like write on your paper, old school. Like if you turned in a piece of paper to me and I had a pen and I wrote comments on it, that's what I did this time. And that's what I emailed you on Saturday. So there's a problem with that. Potentially there's a problem with that is you can't read my handwriting. That's a problem. So if you want to talk about that today, if you have access to that version of your problem solution paper and you want to pull it up, I can interpret my handwriting for you. Or we can do it after class. We can do it via email conference, whatever you'd like. But there's another part of the feedback that I gave you that's also going to be a little challenging. Not just what does my handwriting look like, but what does it mean when I squiggle, scribble, mark this or that or the other? Let me explain. Here is one of y'all's papers possibly, or somebody maybe from my morning class. At this point, it doesn't really matter whose it is. This is representative of your work. Now, immediately, the first thing that you see likely is the score. 94 out of 100. That's a pretty good score, right? You'd take that. That's an A. Okay. I think that's the least relevant piece of feedback on the whole page. I don't think that matters much because that doesn't tell you what you did well, not in and of itself, nor does it tell you what you can improve, because what I'm asking you to do is build upon this feedback. Take what you have learned here, but improve it, because I'm taking the time out to mark on your page. Doing so, I believe, gets me something. I believe taking the time to mark your page gets me a better product when it's in the research paper form. I think it helps you deliver a more successful, more professional, more complete product. I'm happy to invest the time in your work, but I'm hoping that you will then take that mark and fix it. Not in this paper, because we're not revising this paper, but you'll fix it in your next paper, the research paper. So to build toward the successful research paper, part of what I want to do is show you your problem solution. What I'm about to give you here is representative. Many students have things that look similar to this. Yours may not be exactly like this, but there's enough of an echo here that I think this represents many people's experience with the problem solution paper. Not everybody did that, though. So if this is not you, then you'll just hang in here with me. I'll get to something that probably is you. Sometimes what I did here was I just went circle, and I didn't even explain what it is. Do you know why I circled that? If not, then you should ask me. you should try to reach out to me. But I think you should also try to figure it out on your own. I circled it for some reason. There's something wrong with that. Tell me what's wrong with that. What is it? Okay, in this case, we would not use the comma. I know that like when we often do dates, like not in the MLA way that we do in English class, but just normally, we would put like a comma, like January 30th, comma, 2002, or whatever it is. In this case, this we do like that military style or European style. So it's date, month, year, no commas required. So that's a good guess, but that's not in this case the specific challenge I have or the concern that I'm expressing. There you go. You did not write a completed problem solution essay on January 30th. This thing came in like February 29th or March 3rd or whatever it was. You could not have written this essay on January 30th. I would like you to always update your date. Turn in the most recent version of your work and let me know it's the most recent version of your work by giving me the more recent date. So, but that's a perfect example of Jose had a perfectly logical guess as to what might be wrong there, but it wasn't what I was thinking. If you're not sure, please ask, please reach out. Is that the most important thing in your paper? No, but it's just one of those final things that I think you can use to elevate your work. Look, my belief here is this. Y'all are finishing your writing curriculum with me. After this, you never take another writing class, probably. You're just expected to know how to write. So you're going to move on to complete this degree here at MCC. You're going to get a complete bachelor's degree here or elsewhere. You're going to take junior level work, senior level work. They're going to expect in your junior and senior level coursework, you know how to write, or that somebody taught you how to write. But you go into graduate school, they're going to expect that. You go into whatever your professional field is, they'll expect you to be articulate and thoughtful and know how to follow the rules. This is just one of those little things that I think helps elevate you above the rest. Attention to little bits of detail. I think that's what I'm really showing today. Some of those little bits of detail, those fine-tuning things. It's not, in many cases, the building of the Eiffel Tower. It's built and built pretty well. Look at that, 94 out of 100. I'm talking about like little flourishes about, did you kind of paint this corner of it very nicely? Or would you want to add some new piece of lighting there in that stairwell to make it a little bit brighter? I'm asking you to consider small touches, but sometimes important touches and required touches. Let's go with this one first. Here's a mark on the page. Do you have any idea what that means? Ooh, you guys are good. My morning class not so fast. You guys are much faster. This is a very common experience that you will see in this feedback, I believe. One of the most common things you'll see me do is circle a number. Now, I know it overprints other things, so it's hard to maybe see what the number is, but this is where I'll ask you to consider, let's go back to this. Let's go back to our numbered codes. I'm talking about there, code number 4. Code number 4, you already saw, in-text citation. I think the student might argue, but I gave you an in-text citation, Professor Webb, and I'm pushing back and saying, that's not right. I'll offer this, good morning. It's never the name of the organization. The name of the organization never is what goes in the parentheses. NAACP is the name of the organization. What should it actually be? Louder, sorry. It should be the article title, in quotation marks, article title. If, and only if, there's no actual author's last name. If you got an actual person's last name, Smith or Jones or Garcia, whatever it is, put the actual author's last name in. If not, then article title, absolutely, but never the name of the organization. So we could go to the works cited page, we could figure out what it should be, but you're going to see this student has a number of 4s that I keep applying. The in-text citations are fairly consistently incorrect, but the student knows to put an in-text citation and the student is trying his or her best. I give credit to that student. I wasn't going to degrade the overall score of the essay for this, but I am pointing it out. Maybe it lost a point or 2 for this, but I'm pointing out that for the next assignment, the research paper, I probably will take more points off next time if it remains uncorrected, if it remains a touch that, a final finishing touch that is not addressed or is ignored, then you might not score as well next time out. But the good news is this essay is quite sound. It's quite strong. It's just a couple little things. I'm asking for adjustments. Now, at some point, the student probably has another 4 circled and another 4 circled, and then I'm going to stop marking. I'm not going to mark it every time. If I mark it 2 or 3 times, understand, and you'll see it as we work through this essay, the amount of ink I put on the essay diminishes as I move forward because I'm not going to keep marking the same thing over and over. I expect you to see that and go and find the other ones, or at least understand that's a thing. You're not correcting this paper, but for the next one. Let me show you a few other things here. Because the other challenge with this assignment, again, you've never seen my old school handwriting annotation of your essays. What's all this business about? Looks like I was sitting at some soccer tournament someplace, like in one of those like little chairs at the side of the field trying to write in the midst of a windstorm, and I might have been. Sometimes it looks that way, and sometimes I'm trying to grade on the fly a little bit. It looks a little sloppy sometimes, and sometimes the digital writing is challenging. But the other thing is you're just not familiar with this. That's why I also send out in the Brightspace announcement this document. It gives you proofreading symbols. This is old school. This is, I didn't invent this. This was given to me by every other writing teacher I ever had. Maybe you've seen this in other English classrooms you've had like since first grade. There's some poster up on the wall that said, these are the proofreading symbols, or they were in every textbook. Like if you're gonna tell somebody capitalize something, you put a triple underline under it. Capitalize the B in Bible. Or if you're gonna say, hey, put a period in there, it's like a circle with a dot around it. Got this one here, space. It's what we now call hashtag. But notice if you like got somebody who's like smushing stuff together, the end, I'll say, hey, put that little hashtag there in the middle and let's separate that out, because you know the and end is not one word. That's two words. All right, the challenge here is kind of slowing down and trying to see what is Professor Webb doing when he scribbles here. But I hope at some point you can begin to see high, comma, prison, all-time high, comma, prison quality, something. You know that's not one word. You know that's two words. And my mark is there trying to suggest it's a two-word thing. You just got a smush problem. You need to unsmush, you need to space it out. But you also know that there's an issue there. You also know there's a problem there, whether you're a Google Docs user, I think this is true. And certainly if you're a Word user, this is definitely true. You got the red squiggly underline. Red squiggly underline is the word processing program telling you there's a problem there. There's something there that's weird. Often what you can do is just like highlight that word, right click on it, and it'll tell you how to fix it. And it's usually right. It's usually pretty clear immediately the step you should take to correct it. So visually, I'm asking you, use those tools that are available to you. Run a spell check, run a grammar check, but also just run a visual check. Sometimes the software is trying to help you out. Before you publish, before you send something off to be graded, give it one more read through and see if you can see some of this stuff and clean up the obvious. All right, so I got another one there. You see there over at the left, the word violence and the word something else, whatever is after that, they're smushed together. I'm gonna go another add a space, looks like hashtag, and then I'm gonna stop doing that at a certain point. The student seemed to have a real kind of issue with words jamming together. You can go figure that out on your own after 2 or 3 times I mark it. I trust you can see it. Let me show you some of the other things you're likely going to encounter in the handwritten feedback. I'm trying to kind of catch enough of these so that you will see what's probably on your paper, at least some of what's going to be on your paper. Now, same note here, a 4. And we're going to have another one down here for, in this case, the student is again doing what the student is supposed to do. The student understands after a quotation, have a citation. The student is even giving me the page number in the citation. That's great. But I'm saying, yeah, but 4, because I still need that author's name and the page number. So it's close. There's a whole lot of here that's really good. There's just like a little bit more that needs to be done. Now, all right, sometimes you're going to see this. Sometimes you're going to see this. Student says, according to the American Civil Liberties Union, American Civil Liberty Union says, and then I tag this with a note, but it's the wrong note. I like mentally went to a different place when I started inking. It's not a third person problem here. What's the problem with says? It's a word choice issue. I won't let you say says in your papers. Says is a bit slangy. It's a bit casual. You're not writing a casual paper. You're writing a formal paper. It's an academic paper. These are high level sources. They don't says stuff. How can you say says without saying says? States is the obvious go-to. Just say the American Civil Liberty Union states, or it reports, or it condemns, or it praises, or whatever it does. This is one of those like little things I think that elevates your writing. Don't say says, say states, or some variation of that. All right, allow me to work a little faster now. I think some of you are kind of nodding. You're just like, okay, we get the idea, Professor Webb here. Let me show you maybe a few different things. Over at the left, 6 and 2. What's a 6 and 2? Go back to that list of construction codes. 6 is transition. Notice that that paragraph just begins with according to. Well, how do we get to a new paragraph? Is this like in addition to or in contrast? Is this a first or second? Is this a continuation of the previous paragraph or some randomly totally new thing? Let me know, maybe a little bit. That's the idea of a little bit of a transition, but I also need a topic sentence there. According to would never be the first sentence of a paragraph. That's like the second sentence. Before you credential it, you got to give me the topic sentence. Before you can give me that 3, which is up there, give me the 2, give me the topic sentence. Then you can go 3, 4, 5. It works pretty well. If it works well, I'm not going to over ink the page. Sometimes you'll see a couple of check marks in the margin, me going, yeah, nice, nice, nice. But you also maybe are going to see handwritten stuff, which again is totally legible to me because it's my handwriting. It may not be to you. So do your best. And if you have to like take a photo, screenshot it, email me, say, hey, on page 3, when you wrote scribble, scribble, what does that mean? And sometimes a photo is helpful so I can like interpret my handwriting for you. But like I know this, it says quote this, but remove the ital. Student has criminal justice facts in the in-text citation. That would be the article title and a page number, number 1. But my little adjustment is that's an article title. It should have quotation marks around it and it should not be italicized. So small note again, but a consistent note because it happens here. It also happens here. The student is italicizing incorrectly. They should be quotes, not italics. If honestly, I asked the student to go in and correct all this, everything I've talked about so far would just take like 3 minutes to correct all of it. It's all small stuff. But that's what's elevating this paper, or what would elevate this paper into the high A level. All right, so same notes, same notes. Sometimes I might use 2 colors just to make sure that one note is separate from another, you might see. Similar sorts of notes, similar sorts of notes. Here's a new one. Now, this is one of those construction things. This goes back to the Eiffel Tower. I absolutely believe in this. I think if I'm your building inspector and I come in and look around at your building, which I am, I'm going to require this. When you finish a paragraph, you have to have 2 sentences, not 1. Notice here at the end of this quotation, it says something, the general population, end quote, page 1. That is the citation. And then it says from this. And the student, you can see, the student is offering interpretation of that quotation. The student writes, let me highlight this. From this, from the statistic, it is seen that, so from whatever's in the quote, it can be understood now something. That's interpretation of the quotation. That's perfect. That's what I want you to do. That, in fact, what the student has done there is a 5. Offer interpretation of the quotation. So excellent, that's there. But I've tagged it with this note in this way to suggest that there's one other thing I also would encourage, which is this, an 8-11. I like the idea of the 8. It's also the infinity symbol, but it's kind of circular and it comes back on itself. And I like the idea of the 1 because it repeats. You can go to your construction codes and you can see what code 8 is. And you can see what code 11 is. I think they overlap enough. I just kind of treat them as the same code now. That's a summation. Sure, this sentence, from this statistic, it is seen that you're offering interpretation of that 1 quotation, but I need one more sentence that offers summation of the whole paragraph. What is now this whole paragraph? What has it established? What is now more clear? That's what this one is, the 8-11. So it's just missing 1 sentence, basically. That's the encouragement there. And this student is going to be, as almost all of you are with this assignment, very consistent. So let me move forward beyond where we were just at. And you'll see it's a lot of the same stuff. It's always the same stuff. It's some 4s and some using the italics incorrectly. Here's a new one, expand. You're not going to revise this assignment, you know that, but I'm suggesting that I think this was a moment in your paper you could have probably done a bit more. Expand is my encouragement to say, you know, this was a moment, this is the efficacy evaluation. In the efficacy paragraph, I think there was probably more to say than just 3 sentences. I think there might have been a little bit more depth that could have been explored in your efficacy evaluation. So as an opportunity, you might think about that as a writer, I'll show you a little bit today, some of the areas in the second part of the hour, some of the areas I hope that you'll spend a little bit more time, because I'm going to spend some time on them today. Maybe you'll expand and do a little bit more with those, and I'll show you. Okay, so look, basically it all works. Here's the last one we'll do, and then we'll go to the works cited page here. Student is doing a whole lot of what the student should do. The student is doing a thorough and fairly consistent job here with this. And we know what the note here is don't italicize. It should be in quotation marks. It's an article title. But I want to give you this note, condense. We don't need the whole article title in there. If there is an opportunity for us to use the in-text citation, it is to then go to the works cited page and find this article. That's why these exist, is to take us to the works cited page. And we go, oh, let me scan down. I'll find this one. The first word is probably enough. Probably no other entry on the works cited page begins with the word evaluation. If you just gave me evaluation and take all the rest of this out, it would be effective. If you want to include maybe another word or two, just a little bit of it, you certainly could. Evaluation of peaceful, whatever it may be, the first 2 or 3 words. And then that's sufficient. So my note there is condense. You can do a little bit less. I like that the student has been very consistent here. I feel like this is well built. There's some small stylistic things that need addressing, but the consistency is really affirming. It's complete. It has all the paragraphs, and all the paragraphs are generally built well. They all just have like that little one thing or 2 things or 3 things. All right, that's great news. Now let me show you other great news about this paper. A couple of parts about this that I really do like. Let me go all the way down to the expand, explore. Let me go all the way down to the works cited page. All right, there's a whole lot of this. That's great. Notice that each of the entries has the first word over at the left, and then the second line indents. It's got that hanging indent. So that's nicely done. It's consistently done. Many of these are entirely correct in terms of their sequence of the author unit, the article title unit, this should be italicized, the name of the website, the date, and then the address. Correct. Looks good. Alphabetically, though, I got a little bit of a problem here. Alphabetically, I look at this and say, I see that Lawrence begins with an L. Prison begins with a P. Those aren't in alphabetical order. Lawrence should come ahead of prison. But then if we're really going to start this game, where does O'Hare go? Well, what we're going to find is that this entire works cited page is not alphabetized at all. They're just in whatever random order. I'm not quite sure what the random order is, but it's pretty random. All right, that's definitely one of those things that on your works cited page on your research paper, I'm inclined to go, oh, that's worth at least 2 to 5 point deduction right there. Because that's the thing I think you should be able to do consistently, is know that the works cited page is organized alphabetically. So that's a thing. But I started with praise. It looks good, and the sources are strong. Now, this is one of those weird random things here. When the database or whoever did this for you writes in all caps, turn the all caps off. You got to undo that. And I'll tell you, because I used to have to retype those things. I used to always retype those things. There's a way that the software will do it for you. I really like this. I'm going to take just a second to show you this. It may not apply to most of you in the room, but I'd love this as a time-saving tool. I'm going to highlight this whole thing here, and there's a little button up here on the home section. I'm up here on home, and I think it's these like the big A, little a up here. Big A, little a will change all sorts of capitalizations and stuff for you. And I think I can just go capitalize each word. Oh. So small thing that I like. I like when the machines do the work for us. All right, look, not much ink, looking good. Except for a little bit of ink here. Probably there's more ink at the top. I need to add a note here about alphabetizing for this student. But I'd also just say a couple of things. It mostly works. Where might it need a little bit of addressing? The margins are too large there at the left. This should be a 1-inch margin. It's closer to 1.5 inches or something. I've also got this thing, and this is a matter of debate. I want to acknowledge this. And for those who do like APA style, maybe this is more an APA style thing. This is the name of the organization, the NIDA. NIDA down here. There's another organization right below it, pewtrust.org. Name of the organization I will strike out every time because that's not a person. MLA style seems to say you can do either one. You can have the corporate author or the institutional author, the organization as the author, or not. Depends on which part of the handbook you read. I'll say it's a not. I think if it's not a person, I think you just start with treatment and recovery. That's the first part of the entry. There is no author because it's not a person. That's why this is what goes in the in-text citation, because it's the first thing that you see here. That's the choice that we make. It would never be the name of the organization. And maybe that's why the student was a little bit confused with some of the in-text citations earlier. This student has worked well. This student has an opportunity to get a little bit better. And if this is you, if any of this is unclear, we can certainly continue to talk about your paper after class. But I want you to begin to see that it is generally true that your papers are going to have things like this. Here's a different paper. It might be one of yours in this room. I think this, in fact, is one of yours in the room. Great score, but again, the score is not the most important thing here, because can the student replicate the score in the future? All right, look, check mark there in the margin. Great. You know, that's the kind of thesis. It presents the problem and the solutions. I know where this essay is going. But look, even in really strong papers, it's the same thing. How are we going to fix that? That's the number 4. It probably just needs quotation marks there. That's probably all that one is. What are we going to do down here? Oh, we need a 5 and an 8 and an 11. We've already done that. The student already knows. Oh, yeah, we're going to make sure we have 2 sentences at the end of the paragraph, not 1. All right, it's all the same stuff. It's all the same stuff to some degree. That's the good news. If your papers are consistent, you're in a solid place. The challenge, let me be clear, is understanding all this business in my handwriting. That's kind of the skill set right now that I've forced upon you of how to receive feedback in a slightly less familiar way. But I'd ask you to also think that this is becoming more familiar, I hope. This kind of construction by using a system. That's all paragraphs are. We talked in a previous class about fractals. This is just a fractal lecture again. If you can build one paragraph, you can build 1,000. So let's just kind of let's get kind of a couple of those last tools in place, those last techniques really solid. And then we just finish out the semester. We finish out the research paper. We finish out all together. Some of you I know are even graduating this semester, so you get to finish that too. I'm about to transition into my next unit, next kind of thing I want to do here today. But before I do, let me make sure I'm responding to your questions or your concerns. Has anything, sorry about that, has anything come up? Think about your paper. Maybe you've already seen your feedback. Maybe you've looked at your feedback, or maybe this sparked some questions. Anything I can address? Anything that was unclear? Okay, yes. Okay. Okay, so the question is, and I'll just repeat for the headset a little bit. It seems to be about concern about formatting. The student says, looks good on her computer, but looks different on mine. So I'm marking it. That may be a thing. And Christy, do you like typically bring a laptop to class, or could you? Maybe bring a laptop to Wednesday's class. Let me see what it looks like on your monitor, and we'll see if it's different. Because I'm opening the file directly from Brightspace, and I open it as a Word document or as a PDF document. So the format shouldn't change. Oh yeah, if I'm drawing those arrows, I'm saying push it off. Yeah. Yeah, it should have the block quote should have a double indent. Okay. And I'll tell you what, Christy, before you leave today, let me pull up your document and let's take a look at like the marks I actually marked on the page. So that's awesome. Good. Great. So what else? Okay, but in theory, Word should not change your formatting. If you're well, but I would say this: are you working in like Google Docs? Okay, because if you translate from Google Docs to Word, there might be a transition, but word to word shouldn't change at all. Okay. Now, Grace, I'm not disagreeing with you, but what Grace ultimately said though is yes, if you want to freeze formatting for sure, save it as a PDF. I mean, for all of you, I sent you a PDF because this version that I have where I'd like write on it, if I send you a Word version of that, your Word version may not keep the handwriting in all the same place. It will definitely distort. So Grace, I agree with you that sometimes Word will not be as stable, but save it as a PDF, it's locked. So that's a good solution. You know, should it happen in the past that you have to get like, or in the future that you have to get absolute certainty with it looks right, PDF. Good, thank you. All right, so this is, I think, the writer's job. This is your opportunity to look at the work, to look back on your work now, because it's been some time, and see what there is to learn from it. You know, let's move forward and improve. But as much as I can, I'd like to help. I'd still like to be part of that process. So as much as Christy, as long as you're comfortable, come on up, let's talk. Others in the room, we can certainly look at your work as well, and I can expand or explain what I seem to suggest might be a still opportunity for you. But I'm ready to move on to my new thing here today. Let's talk about research paper. Let's talk about research paper. There's a couple more documents I'll make available to you this week, but I want to start with this one to kind of organize this transition into research paper. I want to talk to you about the rubric for our research paper. Rubric for the research paper has some things that are just fairly kind of basic. First of all, it's a 10-page minimum, which means you have to get to an 11th page writing-wise. Works cited page doesn't count as part of the 10. But a number of you saw from your problem solution paper, 10 pages is not a problem for y'all. You're going to get to 10 pages without even really trying, particularly if you complete the outline that you've promised me and you get 2 sources per all the paragraphs. You're supposed to have 2 sources. You can't write this research paper in under 10 pages. Students who typically turn in a 5 or 6 page research paper, they don't get a low grade on the research paper because it wasn't 10 pages. They'll lose some points for that. They get a low grade on the research paper because it's incomplete or it's underdeveloped because they didn't really do the job. If you do the build the way you've been taught and the way you've shown me on your problem solution paper, you can do the build, you're good. 10 pages not the concern. Title and subtitle, double space, Times New Roman, all that, you know, is not a surprise. You could have predicted all that as well. So let's get to maybe the next section that might be engaging or interesting or new, but I'd argue that 8 through 12 also you knew. 8, and this is a fair amount of what you did in your first 2 pages assignment. I will be delivering that back to you, same style, handwritten annotations as an emailed PDF, like I did with problem solution. I'll send you feedback on your first 2 pages later this week. But I need you to know right now, first 2 pages on your research paper, they generally look fine. They look good. There's not a lot for you to micromanage on those. But I do want you to make sure, and here's some of the things I'm going to look for on your first 2 pages. Does your first 2 pages have a clear attention grabber? Is there something on there that helps me get engaged immediately? Most of you did a nice job with this. How about number 9? Do you have a very clear statement of your thesis? By that, I mean, you're going to compare thing X or thing A and thing B. Which is better, A or B? By having 3 criteria. I want you to tell me what your plan is. You're going to evaluate A versus B by looking at X, Y, and Z. Look at X, Y, and Z. Tell me that that's the path, so I know that's the shape that your research paper will take in the middle. Number 10, do you have a clear statement of the research question? Which is better, A or B? There's your research question. And then let's look at number 11, 10 sources, minimum. I think it's hard to write this paper with 10 sources. You'll likely have more. I mean, just think about the fact that you have to have 2 sources per paragraph. And how many paragraphs are there? 10 is probably too few. But notice A, the subtopic there. I'm asking you to use the databases. I'm asking you to try to use the databases. I suggest of the 10, 5 have to be academic sources from the database itself, articles from the database. Now, it kind of looks like that means half your sources have to be. But if you use more than the 10, let's say you're going to use 15 or 20 sources, I'm not saying half of your sources have to be database sources. Look, I would honestly love for all of your sources to come from the databases. But that may not be the best case for your research paper or yours. I mean, like the 3 of you I just randomly pointed to, I know your specific subjects, yours too, are going to require you to use sources that are non-database sources because of the nature of your question. But I do want you to use some database sources. So it's in there. And look, and no Wikipedia, where that's not really a thing anymore. And look, try to spread it around. If you love Forbes magazine, and Forbes magazine gives you a whole bunch of really good articles, maybe like cap that at like 3 articles from Forbes. And then let's find some other magazines that also, or journals, or interviews on YouTube, or documentaries on Netflix, or whatever it is that also help you, or books that actually help you. So let's spread it around a little bit. Raylan. Yep. Okay. There is no pre-approved list of sources for the research paper. For the research paper. No, for the problem. Okay, for the problem solution paper. Oh, I see that I may have not quite communicated this very well. Well, okay. Okay, if you've been using the list of pre-approved sources for the problem solution paper, you're still using excellent sources. I don't think that's a problem. But do you think you'll have a more effective approach now? Okay. Okay. All right. I should have been much more overt about this in an earlier semester. I'm sorry about that. Okay. Okay. There would have been a day. Well, trust me. Let me step back and see if I actually did this semester. But I would have talked about like looking at a website that a student sent me, and she said she was at a class in UT, and they taught us how to like read a web page. And she's like, "Oh, I remembered your class, Professor Webb, when you did this to us." Some of you are nodding. That was the day I tried to say, "Look, I deputize you to say, look at your sources, and if they cite their sources, if they tell you who they are, if they are transparent in the way they deliver it, then you could use it." So parents.com, I don't know anything about parents.com. So sure. Gotcha. Okay, so I would say this. I 100% agree. Sometimes websites are so much more clear than database articles. Because again, those database articles are written by professors for professors. Does your basic website, though, does it pass the test? Does it credential its sources? Do the people who write have degrees in the subject? So if the answer is yes and yes, then you can use it. And in particular, .edus still remain very strong. .govs remain very strong. Those are still on the pre-approved list. They were from the beginning, and they would continue. So if that helps here at the end to loosen things up, I should have been more overt about this earlier in the semester. I see some brighter smiles now, so maybe your job just got easier. But don't use Wikipedia. Good. 13, 14, 15. Let's move into heart of your paper. This section is like 50-point section. This is really the body of your paper. Overall comparison is evaluated. Do you have a clear comparison? X versus Y, or A versus B, whatever we're doing here today. Sometimes students aren't as clear, so you're clear. I've made sure that through your outline and through your 2 sources that you're comparing 2 different things. So check. 13 is good. 14, do you have criteria that are logical and relevant? We've already worked that out from the very first time we started this, certainly through the prospectus, through the sources, through the first 2 pages on the outline. I think you have criteria that make sense, that will allow you to actually answer your question effectively. So check, you're good. 15, is your overall organization logical and coherent? Your outline tells me that you have a logical and cohesive outline. You have a design that will work. Your Eiffel Tower will be an effective Eiffel Tower. Check. Look, so you're in great shape so far. The next 2 is really the work you're doing now. Maybe you've already completed a fair amount of this. So 16 is maybe just a tweak or something for you to consider. Because in 16, here's what I'm going to ask you to do. You have evaluation criteria. You're going to look at, whatever you're looking at, A versus B. And we're going to evaluate it based on criteria. The criteria will be cost, value, and durability. So whatever it is we're evaluating, let's say we're evaluating 2 types of green energy cars, electric car versus a nitrogen fuel cell car, which is the better like green technology car. We're going to evaluate it. Our evaluation criteria will be cost, value, and durability. But I'm going to ask you this. Consider, you're presenting these in a progressive order of importance. Progressive order of importance. I'd ask you to consider, and this is like a little bit of a writer's trick, definitely. But I'd like you to play the game well, so let me teach you this trick. Public speakers do it, politicians do it, lots of people do this. Of the three, which is the most important? If we have these evaluation criteria of cost, value, durability, trying to decide like for a car, which is the better car, which of those criteria is the most important one? Which one matters most? Look, I don't know, but tell me that one of them is more than the rest. This is the trick that you play. This is the little kind of sleight of hand that you do. Say, of these three, the most important of all, and save that one for the last. Let's build toward that, a progressive order of importance. Save the biggest knockout punch for the third one. Save that for the end. Say, perhaps most important of all, perhaps most meaningful of all, perhaps the whatever of all is durability, or whatever it may be. Save the biggest and the best for the end. It helps me think that you have organized your paper. It allows me to believe that you have been giving me steps all along to build toward this. It inspires confidence in me, the reader, that you're delivering a well-designed product. Because you told me it's designed, because you saved the best and the most important for the end. You've built toward it, probably by presenting those other ones first, and now you can now lay out the final truth. So let me stand over here and just say two things about that. Does it matter to me which one you choose as your most important of all? No. You can just choose one perhaps randomly, and how would I know? I'll take your word for it. But you might consider, maybe you redesign your sections. What we're talking about here with these evaluation criteria sections are the 5 paragraphs and the 5 paragraphs and the 5 paragraphs. Well, could you just copy and paste and move your 5 paragraphs up and down and around? Possibly, yes. Because now you know I'm asking you to maybe build toward which was the one that matters the most. Maybe save that for the third one. Maybe save that for the last one. So I'm asking you to think about your paper and say, like, what's the best order to put them in? You had an order, but is that still the best order? Maybe it is, maybe it's not, but I'm asking you to think about it. That's what this specific one is doing right now, right here. And now this is the one that we've actually talked about last week a fair amount. Each one of your criterion sections has the 2 subtopics. Each one of your criterion sections has, if we're looking at cost, it's the initial cost and the ongoing cost, right? If we're looking at durability, it's whatever durability is and the other durability. And you know you're building those with a 5 paragraph unit. This one was kind of the work that I laid out for you last week. This was, I hope, the work that you've made some progress on. This is that 15 paragraph section in the middle of your paper, which then lets me know that we can move toward the end of your paper. Let's talk about the final 4. Let's talk about the end of your paper. ABC, you've already done. ABC was done in your first 2 pages. That's where you provide some background, some context, some definition. Again, that feedback will come later this week. So let's look at the D, E, F, and G here. These are your final 4. You have available to you as tools to finalize your presentation to your reader what I would consider 4 really solid opportunities. D, your overall findings. What did you find when you evaluated the evaluation criteria? We looked at the cost, the value, and the durability. And we had all the subtopics, and we did the mini winners. So now I want you to write a findings paragraph where you say, when we add up all the mini findings, who's the winner overall of your research paper? I would encourage you, I'm going to make 2 research papers available to you. I would encourage you to take a look at these 2 research papers in detail, definitely. But at the end of the chapter in the textbook, there are a dozen research papers there. Maybe go open up 1 or 2 of those and just like go to the end and like count up 4 paragraphs. Count up, because this will be the last paragraph. And this will be the second to last paragraph. That'll be the third to last paragraph. So the findings will be the 4th from the end. You could just go and like look at all their findings paragraphs, see how did they do it. Plus, you can also just look at their topic sentences. And the topic sentences, I think, will typically make it quite clear that, oh, that's the findings paragraph. I'm not going to dwell on the findings paragraphs today. There are models available to you in Brightspace and the research papers as well as the models. I really want to deal with the next two, the limitations, E, and the rebuttal of critics, F. That's really what I want to focus in on right now, because these to me are a little bit like that thing I just told you about a moment ago about the progressive order of importance, how you take one of those and you say, oh, this is the most important of all. That's a trick. That's a writer's trick or a speaker's trick. The adding value or adding emphasis trick. Well, I'm going to show you a variation of, another type of trick here. The variation of the attack embrace, right? Attack your paper, but then show why, in fact, you love your paper. We did a version of this in the problem solution paper in your efficacy paragraph. Your efficacy paragraph, you challenged your solution. You're like, yeah, the solution won't work all the time, or it'll be really expensive, but it's still a pretty good solution. You came back to the embrace. So attack, embrace. We're going to do a variation of that here with the E and the F. E, limitations. F, rebuttal. Let me show you what these paragraphs look like. Let's start with the limitations paragraph. I have a model here that has excerpts taken from a student's research paper. So it's just like one paragraph out of the research paper, doesn't have the full context. I'll explain just a little bit about what this is, and then I'll show you another excerpt from a different student, and then another different student. So let's do limitations first here. Student has written a really solid research paper. The student has written about wind versus coal, or some version of solar versus energy, whatever it's energy versus energy research paper. We've talked about that like every day all semester. So here's a research paper that's about that, energy versus energy. And the student has run the comparison, the evaluation criteria in the 5 paragraph sections, and done the master findings too, and came up with a winner, an overall winner. So now I want you to engage your paper at this level. Tell me, the reader, what did your paper not do? What did your paper leave out? What couldn't you find, maybe? What has limited your paper either by choice, because you chose to exclude it, or by function, because you couldn't find it? What maybe makes your paper not quite all that? Student offers this. Overall, many different approaches could have been taken to accomplish the findings of this paper. Student does not use the word limitations. I'd like you to use that word. I think that's a more effective choice. Really tell me what we're doing. We're doing limitations, but the concept is here. The student continues, power generation and what seems to be the best source seems to be a debatable subject. Okay, so that's going to acknowledge what goes into the next line. It's debatable about should we use wind or solar or nuclear or coal or whatever it may be. It's debatable. And then I really like what the student does here. You're going to see a number of these students do this. They use their transitions. The student says first, so the first limitation, first, other sources of energy could have been brought into this paper to make the research broader. Okay, so this student chose to focus in on, I believe it's wind versus coal. Well, why not solar? That's what this first complaint or concern or limitation is. The student limited the scope of this paper by design. The student excluded things like solar. Okay, doesn't mean it's a bad research paper. Just means it's limited in its focus. It's specific in its focus. The student is acknowledging that. Maybe some other things could have been brought in, but they weren't. Student continues, and I think maybe we could have had a transition here, but I think because it's a slightly new idea, the student continues. Research on wind energy seems to be more prevalent and more recent, while coal power plants seems to be a subject of the past. And I think this actually kind of transitions into the next sentence. So let me kind of roll that out together. The next sentence says, most of the research that was found seems to be focused on the desirable aspects of one and the undesirable aspects of the other. So she's expressing a concern, the student is here, about the research that was available. Research that was available seems like all this wind stuff is really kind of new. There's a lot of stuff on the new green technology, whereas coal is kind of an old thing. Specifically, she seemed to have found that one of the limitations she encounters, not by her design, but by the result of her efforts, that there's a lot of praise for the wind stuff and a lot of attack for the coal. Wind is clean and good, coal is dirty and bad, evidently. So the research seemed to be a little bit biased or imbalanced. She felt that may have limited her ability to write a research paper because the research was kind of unfair. Okay. I think that's a fair thing to acknowledge. Perhaps you didn't find what you were looking for, or it was not as easy. That is the right way to think about this. But notice we're also going to do this. Let's go with also. I want you to have at least two limitations, at least two. Let's make it plural, not just one, but two. She says also. So in addition to that, also, not much information was available on scientific facts about coal power plants. Now, I find that really hard to accept. I don't think that's accurate. But I'll finish reading the sentence and get to the point that she's making. Not much information was available on scientific facts about coal power plants. Instead, more information was available on the pollution levels and new methods of coal burning. So maybe the student was struggling with finding articles about how mechanically do coal power plants work. But what the student did find instead was, here's how the new coal power plants are being designed. Here's the cleaner version of the power plant. So maybe we can't find the scientific facts about how the old ones work, but there's a whole lot about pollution levels and new methods. All right, so again, I had hoped to find one thing, but I kept finding other things. That could limit the ability of your research paper to be focused on something. That's a limitation that impacted your effectiveness with the overall paper. It's a fair thing to acknowledge. I like what the student does here. Notice this one. And this is the student providing me a qualitative evaluation of which is the most, perhaps the most impactful, that thing I'm asking you to consider. The student's doing a little micro version of that in this paragraph. She's built to this. Perhaps, she doesn't say perhaps, she says technology is ultimately the largest limitation in this paper. All right, so of all the limitations, this one is the biggest, most important one. Student writes, both emissions controlled coal power plants and wind power turbines are becoming more advanced in time. The technology is growing rapidly, which means that although this paper, the research paper, might present the facts of today, tomorrow, new developments could be made, changing which energy source is better. So her concern, whatever I write today is outdated by tomorrow. Whatever truths I seem to offer here may not be as valid because technology is rapidly evolving. Okay, does that limit this paper? Yes, it does. It suggests this paper is limited by the moment that it was written in because technology will always be evolving. Good, good, good. There's a reason I'm showing you this as a model. It does what I'm asking you to consider, except there's one thing it does not do here at the end. This seems to be, but my paper's not this, and my paper's not this, and I had a problem with this. Sounds like a whole lot of negativity, a whole lot of dog in the paper. I'd like you to end with positivity. Embrace your paper. End with a statement that says, however, these limitations in no way impacted the quality of the overall paper here. Give me a final note that says your paper is a rock star. You feel good about this paper, right? So we're not just going to attack and attack and attack and end with that as the taste in the mouth. We're going to end with a positive taste in the mouth to say, however, this paper still delivers on solid information and is highly credible. And if you want to sneak in a little note here about how you didn't know about the pre-approved sources because your instructor kept that to himself, you could probably work that into. All right, different research paper, different student. Student was writing about depression and therapies for depression or possible interventions for depression. So that could be like what drugs might we prescribe or other therapies that could be part of this. And I think there may have been a specific focus about women with depression as well. So the student will have presented the whole evaluation criteria. The student will have presented the master findings, the overall findings. And then we launch into several limitations can be applied to this paper. One limitation, I like that kind of the ordering here of these transitions. We're going to have a one, we're probably going to have another someplace. But one, let's start with the one. One limitation to this discussion could be regarding medications for depression, since information on specific medications and their effectiveness is not readily available. All right, so there's a limitation the student encountered. She'd hoped to find more information about medications and what's prescribed, but it wasn't as available. And she'll explain partially why in the next sentence. She writes, medical records are not public domain, so the true number of patients receiving antidepressants is not public knowledge. Great, she's not a medical professional. She's not an agent of the court. She doesn't work for a big pharmacy company. She can't really get access to what she probably believes exists with information. I'm sure it does, but it wasn't on the databases kind of thing. or it wasn't as obvious. Okay, I think that's a limitation to her paper. That's something that limited her experience with the paper. She couldn't quite get all the information. It was not, as she writes there, highlighted in gray, it was not readily available, the data that she hoped for and probably believed should exist. Notice the transition here. I like the transition, helping organize this paragraph for the reader. Another limitation. All right, another limitation is that there are possibly studies involving women with depression that have developed alternative treatments. So not the ones she has looked at, not the whatever drug or whatever therapy, but a new one, a different one. Kind of like what the previous student did with wind versus coal. But what about solar? The student saying, but what about alternative treatments like acupuncture, right? So maybe, but the student is not looking at those. So her paper was limited by choosing to exclude some things. And she gives us a final. A final limitation offered is that some statistics are 3 years old or more, so current statistics based on current figures are not offered. It's a variation on what the last student said. The last student was concerned about technology immediately making the paper seem outdated. This student is saying, I couldn't get the most up-to-date information. I could only find things that were like within 3 years. 3 years old was the most recent thing the student could find. I'm going to argue this. I think for a medical paper about drug trials and patients using drugs, that's the best you're going to get, because if you're going to publish data about people taking drugs to treat their depression and then publish it in a way that is then on a database out of community college in Texas, 3 years is the best timeline you could probably establish there, because there's a lot of protocols you have to go through to design the study, do the study, publish the study, have it reviewed by your peers, correct it, and get it published. I don't think that limits her paper necessarily, but I'm agreeing with her that she can express that as a concern. She had hoped to get up to the minute stuff. And I think now we kind of live in a world where we get COVID dated instantly. So we're a little bit used to, oh, we should get medical data instantly. It's not what she was experiencing. So it was a concern for her. So she expressed it as a limitation. I agree. What's it missing? She needs the however. She needs the big embrace there at the end. She needs to say, however, my paper is super cool. All right, and I'm going to skip this last one because I want to get to our final thing here today. Let me take this all the way back up to the top. Limitations paragraph would be followed by a rebuttal to your critics. It's a variation on the same technique. I'd ask you to think somebody's going to look at your paper, and even though you just presented the limitations, somebody's going to raise an eyebrow and be like, I don't know. Where is your paper vulnerable to a challenge? What might somebody suggest? A reasonable person, an educated person, a thoughtful person, it's not going to be an unreasonable criticism of your paper, but somebody is going to say, I'm not quite convinced by X, or what about Y, or is that really, really true? Z, whatever it is. Somebody's going to challenge your paper. I want you to anticipate a challenge and then answer the challenge, rebut the challenge, which means push back and say, no, that challenge is wrong. The criticism is invalid for this reason, or it's misguided because of that reason. I want you to anticipate the problem and then push back. In doing so, you're still arguing for your position. You're still advocating for your method. You're still affirming that you wrote a solid research paper, but you're doing it a little indirectly. Again, this is another one of these kind of tricks, writer's trick or speaker's trick, of acknowledge a weakness and then turn it into a strength. I'm going to give you kind of a little concept here. I've created this like single kind of PDF document. It's going to feel like we're watching television. Like we're at home watching television. I go home today, this afternoon, I turn the TV on and just randomly some show turns on because that was the channel we were watching when we were last watching TV. You know this thing. I'm just in the middle of something. Notice it's like page 14, like on page 14, and we start like mid-sentence, mid-paragraph, right? So I'm just picking up somebody's research paper, middle of the research paper, but I want you to see in the flow of the paper kind of how this sequence works. Student is finishing up, and I think I should continue that the channel we're watching right now is like the Lifetime channel or the Health channel. We'll change channels in just a minute. And what I seem to have gotten into is some TV show about anorexia and bulimia, because that's what this research paper is about. It's about anorexia and bulimia. All right, whatever the paragraph is at the top that's just ending, that's incomplete, well, I'll skip that. Let me kind of go into the next paragraph, the full paragraph that begins, in light of these results, let's establish another mini winner. Okay, you know where we're at in the research paper process here. You at least know, like in a 5-paragraph sequence, that's the 5th paragraph. The mini winners, what are we establishing? And look, she even helps us see it. She says, this will be determined through the results of the 3rd evaluation criterion. So we're at the end of the evaluation criterion, the 3rd one. This is her mini winner paragraph. And she's going to say, for that criterion, which was worse, which is more harmful, anorexia or bulimia. Then that gets her to, keep going down. That gets her to overall findings. And she'll say the overall findings are determine that anorexia nervosa is more destructive than bulimia nervosa. So anorexia is worse than bulimia. And she'll kind of say why, because in the criteria on this and the other criteria on that, I'll make this model available to you as well, but you can, it's a good example of a findings paragraph. But she'll kind of compare and contrast her mini winners to support that claim. Anorexia is worse than bulimia. All right, again, I'm just trying to show you the sequence here. Limitations. So after she's claimed what she's claimed, the overall findings, she's answered her research question. Now she appears to acknowledge that her paper was limited in some ways. And she'll acknowledge what the limitations are, as we've just seen. And then we're going old school here, going crude, manual, handwritten annotation there in the left-hand margin. I've got a bracket here. This is what we came to see. Critics, rebuttal of critics. Somebody's going to challenge Abigail's paper here. Abigail said anorexia is worse, and she's developed her paper with her criteria. What's a possible challenge? She writes, there are some obvious rebuttals that can be used against this paper. She's misused that term a little bit, but let's get beyond that. One such negation, one such attack on her paper might be about the conclusion of this paper, which dubs anorexia nervosa as the more destructive disorder. So anorexia is the more destructive, and that is the point that she thinks somebody would challenge. So she says, one, like the critic out there, one might say, how can anorexia, oh, let's see if I can do this here today. Oh, I'm in that space where I can't mark on the page at all, so we'll just do it as is, like this. One might say, how can anorexia nervosa be more destructive if bulimia nervosa has a higher prevalence? So how can you claim, Abigail, anorexia is worse when there are more bulimics out there? There are more people with bulimia than anorexia. So don't you have it backwards? Is kind of the complaint here, the critic would say. And she's even got a quote. This statistic shows what the critic is claiming. She's going to even bring in a quote that says, among adolescent girls, 1 to 3% have bulimia and only 1% have anorexia, cited by Harris, Eberly, and Kumela, page 24. Okay, to be very, very clear, of these final 4 paragraphs, you don't need sources, but you're free to include them. And in this paragraph, it's probably the one place you would likely do it. You're going to see a couple of students today do actually bring sources into their critic's paragraph. So she brought in evidence of what the critic would claim. The critic would say, but 3% have, and only 1% have. So how can you claim what you claim? It's like she's got her math backwards, is basically what the criticism is. And she says, yes. She says, yes, it is true. It is true. Bulimia is more prevalent than anorexia. However, she's got her own statistic to cite. 6% of people with anorexia and 1% of people with bulimia will die of their diseases. So 6% outweighs 1% cited. And she tells us this scientifically proven statement indicates that it is possible that my evaluation is correct. Okay, don't say my, because that's first person. But she's trying to argue there, and maybe she could expand that a little bit to say, sure, while more people have bulimia, the deadly aspect is 6 times more likely to happen with anorexics. 6 times more deadly makes it 6 times more serious, which makes her 6 times more correct. You know, ish. I think it's a nice turn. It's a nice way for her to argue in support of what she's argued and just kind of continue to bring evidence in to support that. She's even done a little bit more of that here. Let me just show you a version of this. Bring in more evidence. She says, these lower anorexia rates, like, only 1% as a rate, may be because of the strict and sacrificial nature of the disease. while the higher bulimia rates may be due to the less constrictive style of the disorder. Now, look, the sacrificial nature and the constrictive style, sacrificial and constrictive, I have to believe were presented earlier in the paper. Those are terms that were relevant to her earlier parts of her evaluation. So here she is leaning upon earlier presentation to continue to make her point. Off the top of my head, I don't remember really what these meant, but I know Abigail certainly did. She developed those earlier, and she's recalling earlier parts of her paper. That's one of the likely things that you can also do here. She gets into this. She also says another rebuttal might be, you don't need two. Certainly you can do what you want in your paper. I just need one criticism that you push back on, and you're done. All right, fast. Let's change a few channels here really quickly on our way out the door. And then she writes, in conclusion, and she'll start a summation paragraph to end her research paper, but I'm changing channels already. Here I am, channel B. New channel here, I'm on the Animal Planet channel. And I kid you not, student wrote about trying to save baby turtles. Remember the baby turtles from last week? She literally wrote a research paper about them. The research question was, which is the better way to do animal conservation? If we're going to care for an endangered species, should we only let experts do it? People who are trained marine biologists or animal biologists, or could we let well-intentioned amateurs like my students go and do volunteer work? So who's best able to help endangered species? Experts only or well-meaning amateurs? That was basically her research paper. So she wrote a great research paper. She gave me an overall, the verdict is something. That's her overall master findings. A little brief as a paragraph. She gives us a topic sentence you can read there. Despite providing multiple sources of evidence and evaluating the different methods, there are still some limitations. So we get a limitations paragraph. You know what that is. And then you see my rather crude little market bracket there at the left. Let me present out what she does, because she does a nice job. She also brings in a little bit of research here. She writes, the information that has been gathered above the research paper is the opinion of one person's view, my student. There are others who may not agree that sea turtle conservation is a top priority. According to Aram Agaral and Kent Redford, professor at the University of Michigan, Department of Natural Resources and Environment, member of blah, blah, blah. So these two guys, these experts, state accusations regarding a lack of synergy. That's the phrase, lack of synergy. We'll come back to that. Between conservation and other social goals, such as poverty alleviation, disease eradication, economic growth, and social equity, have been advanced by many different scholars. So the problem is, I'll kind of reset the quote here. We're disconnected in the way we do our social activism and our political activism and our economic activism and our save the world activism. Everybody's kind of doing a thing with poverty and disease and this, but they're not working together, is the concern. A lot of well-intentioned people trying to do everything all at once, and it's not working, is a little bit of the concern. Student says, this means that since conservation methods have been focused on animals and ecosystems for the past years, a gap has opened up between conservation efforts and issues within the human community. Agarwal and Redford are suggesting that conservationists step away from environmental issues and focus more on economic issues such as poverty and disease in order to better the human community. All right, that's a complaint. Who cares about the turtles? Amy, my student, people are suffering. Okay, however, environmental issues are equally as important as economic issues because humans will be living within the environment for years to come. Okay, that's nice. If we fix our environment, we are fixing ourselves. If we care for our ecosystem, we are caring for ourselves. That's a nice argument. I like that. She says, so argument, we'll be living the argument for years to come, and it can't heal on its own. Okay, good, nice. I like that. Whereas economic issues tend to heal over time with or without the aid of humans. I think that's very debatable. I don't know if economic issues just solve themselves. But the attempt is correct. And she concludes, conservation efforts on both sides of the scale, environmental and economic, are both pressing matters, but the debate on which is more of a priority rages on. And no, oh, Amy, she just tanked there. Tanked at the end. That was such a nice paragraph. And then at the end, she's like, whatever. Maybe yes, maybe no. Maybe they're right, maybe I'm right. Maybe we can all be right. No. Stand your ground. This is not about being fair. This is not about saying everybody has an opinion. This is saying those critics are seeing it incorrectly. The vision presented in this research paper is accurate, is sound. This is the right way to go about it. Offer a position or offer a response to whatever the criticism is that supports your position. That's what you're trying to do here. It's a lovely paragraph. It was a great research paper, but just this one line kind of is like, oh, but let's all be nice together. Because I think that's who she was. She was a nice person. No, I want you to be a little bit more aggressive and say, I'm right, you're wrong, go away. And then a summation paragraph. Sea turtle conservation, blah, blah, blah. It's nice, but I'm skipping out. All right, I'm going to go faster. I'm going to skip a little bit of this. I got 5 minutes. I'm going to take all 5. Weather Channel, we're going to skip the Weather Channel one. This is one about a business channel. I'll just briefly say this. The student does a really nice job with comparing, should we do like traditional physical marketing to, if you're going to run a small business, should you like mail things out to people so in their mailbox they get a flyer that says, hey, we're having a sale for Mother's Day. Come in and save 10%, bring a coupon. Or should you send them like Instagram posts saying, Mother's Day sale, come on in for your digital discount? Which is the better way to run a business, old school or new school, basically. Student does a really nice thing here. And I'm going to do this really quickly, just like this. It says something that was used earlier in the paper, a study by these two authors, Tratner and Kapp. Student says some people might think that their statistics or their study was inaccurate, or it was their findings were too inflated. There was that, if you're going to lean on that, is probably an outlier. Maybe you, student, you shouldn't have done that. But then she says, the student says, however, the other thing that I think was also brought in earlier shows that this was not an outlier, that this was consistent with other findings. So she's still kind of arguing her paper here at the end using sources that she already brought in. She's allowing those quality sources to continue to present their quality information in a way that says, look, that's not a problem. That's in fact consistent when we put all this together. This is a really nice example of continuing to argue for your position. And she even brings in another outside source. The student does a nice job. I want to get to this last one here. Okay, long before I knew that this was a term, Shelby had written this paper. Long before we knew what an OG was, long before I knew what an OG was, Shelby wrote the OG research paper. I'm looking around the room. Do y'all know what that is? OG, original gangster. At the top, when comparing Luciano and Capone's histories, she was comparing two gangsters, like historic, actual human gangsters. Al Capone, you've heard of. He was that guy in the Prohibition era, the 1920s, did bootlegging out of Chicago, super famous. And the other guy compared to is Lucky Luciano. Luciano was part of the New York Mafia. You likely don't know about him. He also didn't get arrested famously by the government and die in prison of syphilis famously like Capone did. He lived out a nice long life as a gangster old man. Question was, who was the more gangster? Who was the more OG? Who was the better mafia leader? And she found in her paper, you see, Lucky Luciano was the more impactful mafia man of the 1920s and 1930s. So her findings is Luciano, the guy you'd never heard of, is the better gangster. All right, limitations. We're going to have some limitations. Let's skip that because I want to get to her as the final thing we do here today. She says, look, some critics are going to say that how could Luciano be the most famous, most influential gangster when most of y'all never even heard of the guy? And she basically makes the argument, she builds toward it, that, well, that's exactly the point. He didn't die miserably in jail. He lived out a long life like a gangster kingpin should. That's what partially makes him the greater gangster, because he never got caught. So she makes the argument that even though you never heard of him, maybe that's exactly why he's the better guy. So it's all right. So she does a nice job. But she finishes with this. I love this. This is the last thing we'll say on the way out the door. The critics of this essay have reasonable points. Remember what Amy did a moment ago with the turtle thing where I was like, don't. But Shelby takes it the other way. She goes gangster on this. Critics on the have a reasonable point. But in all, this paper is detailed and excellent. And y'all are wrong. Boom, drop the mic. We go. All right. Your research paper is your research paper. You're not writing about turtles or gangsters or social and media marketing, but you are writing about whatever you're writing about. I'm just trying to give you now in this final opportunity, the final 4. Final 4 ways to finalize your presentation: overall findings, limitations, rebuttal to those critics, and then an overall summation. I know you're packing up. Give me 39 more seconds. Among the things that I will make available to you a little bit later today are 2 model essays, and then I'll explain briefly what we're going to do next time. One of the model essays is going to look like this. When you open it up, it's about, should we try to help somebody overcome a medical injury? Should we tape their injury or brace their injury? But I'm interested in like this because I've added in these notes in the margin where I kind of annotate it and I talk to you. I'm information systems. That's me. But I'm saying, like, look here, this is the thesis with a statement of the research question and evaluation criteria. Or I'll say, look, this is where the background and the history is. So I have structurally marked the whole essay for you, just so you can see where all the parts are. I'm going to make another one available to you that looks like this. It's a little different in the presentation where I've color coded it with this criterion section. So he's got a green section, a blue section, and a pink section. And then as you move through the paper, it's easy to see structurally. All right, so here's the green section. We're going to get 4 paragraphs and then a mini winner. So there should be like 5 green paragraphs. There's 1. There's 2. Right, there's the 3rd one. 4th one. And there are also really good examples of topic sentences. And then there's like the little mini winner paragraph. And then we go blue. And then you're going to see structurally the same color coding sequence. So I'm trying to give you a number of ways to see what the research paper is. On Wednesday, I'll talk to you about the presentation, the PowerPoint presentation. Again, I'll talk to you about ways to record it. I'll bring in your questions, your concerns, I hope, as much as you want to bring them into class, about problem solution paper, about research paper, and we'll have the first 2 pages feedback as well. Questions? We've covered a lot of energy, a lot of territory today. Thanks for your energy. See y'all next time. Yeah, come on up.